generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Tonight, with a federal election called for April 28, we look at where Canada's NDP fits into the national campaign. Then, Steve Paikin speaks to Citizen Labs founder Ron Deibert about his new book about the digital watchdog. That's ahead on the agenda. Since Donald Trump's trade war began, we have seen an unprecedented political swing here in Canada. The Liberals have surged in the polls, and what was once a sure thing for the Conservative Party is no longer. But what about the NDP and Jagmeet Singh? Are they headed towards a historically poor showing on April 28th? Could they lose official party status? And what does it all mean for the future of progressive politics in Canada? Let's dig into that with, in Vancouver, British Columbia, Shachi Kurl, president of the Angus Reid Institute. In the nation's capital, David Moscrop, a freelance journalist and author of Too Dumb for Democracy, Why We Make Bad Political Decisions and How We Make Better Ones. And with us in studio, Kim Wright, principal and founder of Wright Strategies and an NDP strategist. Welcome all. Thank you so much for joining us in studio and online. Let's start this discussion with two numbers. This is from Shachi's polling firm Angus Reid. At the end of last year, the federal NDP was polling at 21% support. Fast forward yesterday, and they are down to a whopping 7%. Shachi, I'm going to start with you. How should we understand what's happening here?
Well, I mean, basically what we're seeing is the NDP's lunch get eaten by the Liberals. The party's support base is being hollowed out, and we have seen a dramatic stampede of NDP supporters abandon the NDP, at least for the time being, and I'll circle back on that, in favor of the Liberals. So what's going on that front? Well, there's a couple of factors. First of all, with Pierre Poilievre finishing last year with a 20-plus point lead, I think a lot of center-left voters have made decisions around trying to create an anybody but Conservatives or anybody but Poilievre situation, and they are choosing to vote strategically and with their feet for a left of center or a centrist candidate that they feel would be best to block Poilievre. There's also just the practicalities of the fact that many current NDP voters are actually not really enamored of the choice that they have in Jagmeet Singh. When we asked NDPers last December, well before Trump, well before the tariff threats, well before the trade war, what they thought about their current leader, did they think that the NDP would be doing better under a different leader? Fully 56% said, yeah, we actually do think the party would be doing better under a different leader. So some of this is leadership. We've seen Singh's own favorability numbers trend down and downward over the last 2 years. That continues. And some of this is really just the perennial issue of where does the left of center vote sit in Canada. And we saw same parallels in 2015, where the NDP vote actually abandoned Tom Mulcair and went over to Justin Trudeau, and the Liberals deemed him to be progressive enough for their choice. And, somewhat ironically, the fact that we're seeing NDP voters abandon Singh for a central banker who's making a lot of noises about fiscal discipline, let's see if that holds. What's really important is the center-left vote is very mutable. It moves around, it changes, and I'm not entirely sure on the Tuesday after the Sunday election writ drop that those votes are locked in, but that's certainly where they are at the moment.
All right. On Sunday, the NDP sent out an email saying when it comes to selecting candidates, it is entering the race with a record-breaking momentum. Yeah. How would you characterize the state the NDP are entering this race in?
So there's a couple of things that are quite great. And New Democrats actually go through nomination meetings for their candidates. It's not anointments and appointments like other parties are allowed to do. You can't just wave a bibbidi-bobbidi-boop magic wand and here's all your candidates. So that does take a little longer, but it was, we started the writ issuance, and shout out to Steve Paikin. It's never a writ drop. But we had about 230, 240 candidates that were already getting ready to knock on doors and already had been knocking on doors. So great momentum start. I'll also give people a bit of history that going into the 2011 campaign, Jack Layton was somewhere in that 10-11% range at the start of that campaign and ended up living in Stornoway come the end of the election. So strange things happen, wonderful things can happen on the campaign trail. It really just depends on how these candidates all show up during the campaign. Do they have momentum? Do they have candidates? Are they able to weather the storm? And what we've seen out of Mr. Carney and his inability to answer simple questions like, what's in your portfolio? How many millions and millions have you made off of buying up real estate and charging outrageous rents to homeowners, including here in Toronto? How do you expect people to believe you're accountable when you won't be accountable on the basic things like how much money do you have and where are you invested and where are your ethics obligations? Those are problematic things for Mr. Carney going into this. And it's why some of those progressive voters who might have been like, oh, okay, not Trudeau, great, let's check out the new guy, kick the tires and go, oh, wait, he's not one of us. He's not part of our team. Where do we go? So then we start to look at, as we saw in the Ontario election, the voter efficiency of New Democrats is extraordinary. Bonnie Crombie was at 30% on election night, didn't have a seat for herself and only had 14 seats. And Marit Stiles has 27 MPPs and is the leader of the official opposition.
21% to 7. That's a pretty big drop.
So what we're seeing, and you would have seen, and I'm sure people were on this program saying, Marit Stiles is going to get no seats. And here she is with 27 in official opposition. So there is a voter efficiency that I'm certain that every pollster will tell you doesn't actually get picked up in those big top line numbers. And I know this because we see it in campaign after campaign. Jagmeet is a seasoned pro. He knows what it's like being on the campaign trail every day and in the scrutiny of media every single day. He's so incredibly focused on who he's in it for, why he's doing this. And he has people who run up to him every day talking about their experience of getting dental care. A program that the Liberals told us said they will absolutely not be able to do in anything less than 7 years and maybe not even then, and we shouldn't hold our breath. And now millions and millions and millions of Canadians are having these programs and access to these services they wouldn't have but for the adult in the room, Jagmeet Singh and the New Democrats.
All right, you mentioned the pollster. We will get to Sachi shortly, but I want to get David into this. How would you characterize the state of the NDP right now?
On a wing and a prayer. I mean, it's true. Things can happen. Lots of things can happen. We've seen the NDP collapse in 1993 to whatever it was, 9 seats. We saw them soar to official opposition. Campaigns matter. That point is important. Not long ago, many of us, including myself, were saying, look, the Liberals are cooked. They're done. Pierre Poilievre is the next Prime Minister of Canada. Now they're like, well, okay, fine, but events. But let's talk about that event. The thing that's shaken up Canadian politics in this election is Donald Trump. If the Liberals are looking back and saying, well, why do we go from nowhere to somewhere? The answer is, well, Justin Trudeau leaves. But Donald Trump starts talking like William McKinley or James Monroe. Someone must have told him who those people were. Someone must have given Donald Trump a president's book, and he learned of these figures, and now we're having to deal with this annexation threat, and that's upended our politics. But now the NDP are caught in this situation where we've got a polarized red-blue race, and they're kind of nowhere. And in political science, we talk about Duverger's law. It's very, very nerdy and arcane, and no one outside of political science likes it, but it's kind of important. And it says basically that in a first-past-the-post system like ours, you sort of get a two-party system. You're meant to, except for there's all these exceptions where you don't get that. And in Canada, we're one of those exceptions. We don't really have that polarized two-party system like they do in, say, British Columbia in the provincial party system. But we don't have that federally. But every so often in elections, we kind of get a simulacrum of it, which is what we're having now. And someone in that situation needs to be pushed out. And right now, that's the NDP. So it's going to be difficult for them, though not impossible, to say, no, we have a value proposition here. We offer something. In fact, we're different. And, this might be getting slightly ahead of us here, but I'll just note it. If I'm the NDP, I'm fighting like hell to get that across by saying, like, look, there's two Tories running for the prime minister here. We're the different ones. The question is, will voters hear that if their question is, who can best deal with Donald Trump?
All right, Shachi, I'm going to come to you. I want you to pick up on what was said here, but also curious, do you think, when we talk about that voter efficiency, do you think it's likely the NDP could finish with fewer than 12 seats and lose official party status?
So it's not for me to take what Kim refers to as top-line polling numbers, even at the metro level or at the urban level, and then layer seat projections onto what we're seeing in aggregate data. But I will say this. When we talk about, it's impossible to figure out the NDP's efficiency at the ground level, I go back to and look at some of the data that we released yesterday, showing, number one, the NDP in third place provincially here in the province of British Columbia, as an example. Okay, well, what does that really mean? Show us what it looks like in Metro Vancouver, which has, traditionally been a stronghold for the NDP. Well, the party at the end of last year was tied for a distant second to the Conservatives with the Liberals, both sitting at about 27%. Today, the Liberals polling in Metro Vancouver are in a first place by a mile, by a wide mile, almost at about 50%, the NDP in a distant third. So do I know from experience and spending the first chapter of my career as a political journalist that the NDP's vote is some of the most driven, most passionate, most committed vote at its very, very core? Yes, but that's sort of the organizing level. It's the core level. The people, on the other hand, who showed up for Jagmeet Singh back in 2021 or 2019 on a wave of goodwill and inspiration because he was a fresher, newer leader at the time, those folks, I think, and I say again, for now, here on day 3 of the campaign, have decamped to the Liberals and I think are not as motivated as by the fact that I think it was David who talked about, Carney being basically a progressive conservative and more about blocking Trump and electing blocking Poilievre and electing somebody who will do a more elbows up job standing up to Trump. I think those are the motivations for voters, and we really have to see what happens with young voters, for example, and young women, traditional support bases for the NDP. Are these voters who are going to, number one, show up? And if they do, are they going to show up for their traditional candidate, or are they going to show up for something new?
All right, Kim. In 2011, Jacqueline and the NDP won 103 seats. In 2015, with Thomas Mulcair, 44 seats. And then, as we mentioned, 2019, 2021, 24 and 25 seats. Our viewers, they're quite smart. We don't need to put a line graph on here. Are you concerned about where the party's sort of larger trend line is?
I'm really not. And I look at the 2015 campaign, and Tom Mulcair was supposed to be the next one, the next prime minister, and then he ran a campaign that was, by all accounts, abysmal, and not who he authentically was. What Canadians always want to see is, who are these leaders authentically? And they get a sense of that. There's a smell test, so how they respond to reporters, how they respond on the campaign trail, what are the policies they're putting forward. And Jagmeet always does quite well in these situations where Tom Mulcair tanked because everyone was like, okay, I was okay with angry Tom, but now he's smiling and weird and trying to be Jack, but not Jack. And, like it looked like a village had lost their idiot. He was smiling so much. And honestly, he just ran an abysmal campaign. This is why he's out of politics. And every time he has picked a winner and loser in one of his columns, I laugh because it was like, oh, that's where it's going to tank, because his instincts are terrible. But I'll put the former leader aside. Jagmeet does really well on the ground. He does really well in the scrums, in the campaign trail, in the cut and thrust of it. His human side. He's now a dad to two young, adorable children. You saw them at the start with they had even had the orange sunglasses on. You know, he understands why he's doing this. Authentically why he's doing this, not because some pollster or some focus group told Pierre Poilievre he should smile more, and that just looks odd. And you know, you see these sloganeerings of Mr. Poilievre, the verbing the noun, so to speak. He's tried axe the tax, he's tried the bring it home, he's tried Canada first. None of them authentically fit. What is interesting, and Mr. Carney's having a similar thing. You know, he was asked on the start of the campaign, well, why are you running into Paikin? He flipped several pages in his briefing book before he read basically the demographic profile of Nepean, didn't get the riding breakdown right, and just fundamentally is just wooden. So he's going to try the Kamala Harris, hang out with every celebrity he can, do a really lovely social media campaign. But you have to strip that away in the 30 some odd days that are left in the campaign and in those debate stages. I mean, just the notion of not wanting to do the TVO debate and only wanting to do the consortium debates and well, it's because of this, well, it's because of that. He can't give a straight answer, and Canadians are going to have a real time with that. Jagmeet, on the other hand, was out there talking about housing policy, how to make housing work for people, how do we expand pharmacare and dental care. He's also sitting there, you know, showing that fighter side. As people are looking for who is going to best take on Donald Trump and protect the interests of Canadians, people are looking for both a bit of a doctoral thesis, but a lot more of that doctor of thugonomics type of situation. It's what we saw in the Ontario election. People want to see somebody who is feisty and fighter and really gets it. It's why Wab Kinew, the NDP premier in Manitoba, is doing so well. So we've got some really great candidates. We've got some really great hotspots. And also we've got a leader who's been battle tested. I'm really excited to see what he does.
All right. David, I want to come to you. When we go back to 2017, like Kim was talking about, when Jagmeet was elected leader of the NDP, lots of excitement, lots of optimism. From that early optimism, now embarking on his third election campaign, do you think Jagmeet has been a successful leader?
Well, first off, a real quick point. You run in Nepean because it's got the best Costco in Ottawa and maybe Canada. Let's get the facts out on the table.
I don't know that Mr. Carney's ever been to a Costco, so I'm not. I wouldn't exactly throw that one out there.
Well, if he's going to go, I'm going to give him some advice right now. Book your tire change well in advance, because if not, you're looking at June to get your winters off. Look, we have to answer the question. We have to go to the core, which is, what is the point of the NDP? And that sounds facetious or flippant, but it's not. I mean that as a serious, deep, fundamental question about what we expect from the party. Because if we're going to evaluate Jagmeet Singh and the NDP, we need to evaluate them on some criteria. If you're the Liberals or the Conservatives federally, that criteria is typically, did you win? Did you become government? How long were you government? How did you leave your party at the end of the day? What did you accomplish while you're in power? That's not something we talk about for the NDP because they've never formed a federal government. We can talk about that in Manitoba and Alberta. We can talk about that in British Columbia. We don't talk about that federally. Well, so what is the point? Well, I would say reasonably might say the point of the NDP is to push policies when they have an opportunity that they think are going to be good for Canadians. On that measure, I think Jagmeet Singh has actually been quite successful. He didn't grow the party electorally in any significant way. It actually went down, but he was there to help get the country some pretty decent pandemic benefits, got some child care, some dental care, some pharmacare, anti-scab legislation, all very nice things. So big W in the win column. But he risked getting rolled electorally because he risks suffering from junior partneritis, which is something that Nick Clegg in the United Kingdom can tell you about, where you get forgotten at best after cooperating with the government, or you get no kudos for the wins, but you get all of the criticism for the losses. They say, well, you're just the same as the government. You're part of this Liberal NDP coalition, that nonsense from the Tories. But it was the Liberals who really delivered on all these other things. But Singh was core, and the NDP was core to getting those policies in a minority situation. I think that's a big win for them. They deserve credit for that. And on those measures, Singh has been quite successful. But then we say, okay, but what about electorally? Well, then it's less successful. And we have to say, well, pending some changes in the current outlook of the election, maybe that wasn't so successful. And so then how do we balance? Because if at the end of the day, your strategy is, well, we want to wait around to be in the right place at the right time to influence policy. Well, you can do that. David Lewis did it in the 1970s with Pierre Trudeau. Ed Broadbent did it in the 1980s with Pierre Trudeau. Jack Layton did it in 2008 with Stephen Harper and global financial crisis benefits, support for people. And Singh did it with Justin Trudeau. But it doesn't get you the keys to, well, wherever the prime minister is going to end up living, Rideau Cottage or some hotel room.
But it is important, though, David. But it is important because when we look at dental care as an example, dental care was a program that the Liberals had ran on, then took it out of their platform, then ran on it, then took it out of their platform. They had no interest in doing it. They had no interest in giving a damn about the interests of Canadians and how they were going to be taken care of. That wasn't their agenda. It was never their agenda. Childcare is another example of that. This is the Liberal government and the Liberal Party since the 90s. When I was a child, were running on childcare. Those kids then had kids, and their kids had kids, and their kids sometimes had kids, and they still didn't have childcare and are still having trouble with it. So the amount of bluster that we see out of Liberals because they think it's what the electorate wants out of a focus group is never what they deliver unless they are pushed and pushed like hell. And that is why every New Democrat will say very much, who are you in this for? Who do you want there fighting for you? And that's when you want the New Democrats. And in a situation like we're in today, with an existential threat coming from the South, and our communities struggling, the fact that you cannot get a one-bedroom apartment anywhere in the country while doing full-time minimum wage is abhorrent about the state of situation. And if you think Mark Carney is going to fix that for you, your kids, your grandkids, or anyone else in your community, I've got another thing coming because the shareholders have never wanted that. And that becomes the problem. And that's why the New Democrats will always have a place. And this is what people are looking for. And when I look at our incumbents, when I look at our leader, when I look at what we're talking about, this is why it's so important. And David, you talked about Carney being a conservative. I wouldn't call him a progressive conservative because I haven't seen anything progressive out of him. But, at the end of the day, what people want in communities is making sure that we're building those communities and that we've got somebody who can fight. And I'm not sure Mark Carney's cut out for it.
All right.
Neither is Pierre Poilievre.
All right, Sachi, I want to come to you. The supply and confidence agreement, of course, has made it very difficult for some Canadians to sort of separate the Liberals and the NDP. And I'm curious, do you think as a leader, Jagmeet Singh has been able to articulate a vision for the NDP that is separate and distinct from the Liberals? And what is that?
Well, a couple of things. I mean, first of all, history is strewn with the detritus of junior partners who got rolled over, shredded, left behind. It's not just a Jagmeet Singh, Justin Trudeau thing. There are many, many examples, both at the provincial level and at the federal level, where the electorate, and I mean, I appreciate that Kim is an NDPer and a passionate, articulate advocate for her leader. That's great. But, frankly, voters themselves will say, thanks for the dental care. Thanks for the child care. That's retrospective. The ballot question in front of us right now is the question on Trump and the question on, do they see Jagmeet Singh as prime ministerial material? Do they see the NDP as government material in this particular campaign? Well, the party's down to 7%, so let's see. The other piece of it, though, that I want to circle back on that we haven't talked about, and when David talks about what is the point of the NDP, and I would frame it as what is the relevance of the NDP through the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, framed itself and styled itself as the party of the working class. And what we've talked about, how the Liberals have eaten the NDP's lunch on progressive issues, on expanding the social safety net. The other place where the NDP has really seen its support base drift away, this time to the Conservatives, is among the working class, particularly among private sector union members. When we do polling every year, as we do around Labor Day, and we talk to union members and we ask them, what's the party, who's the leader who's standing up for the issues that you are most interested in and galvanized by, who's got your best interests at heart? Shockingly, for some, what we saw was a split evenly between the NDP and the Conservatives among private sector union members. So when we think about that Oshawa vote, when we think about that working class vote among union members who are going to build, and we saw, I think, was it just yesterday, a union endorsement for Pierre Poilievre, not for Jagmeet Singh.
It's a smaller
Singh
union,
has... Singh has succumbed to something that a lot of NDP or left leaders, both here and in the United States, have succumbed to, which is becoming a progressive party for urban people in cities, young people. And hey, the rent issue, very important. Affordability issues, very important. But if you are someone who is working class, lower education, living in an exurb or in a rural, remote community doing heavy lifting and trades work, you're more likely these days to be looking at the Conservatives as an alternative than the NDP. That is different from what we saw from the days of Ed Broadbent.
All right. I'm going to point our viewers and you to our screen. I'm going to read a quote from the Walrus from last week. It reads, "After this election, regardless of the outcome, Singh will probably face a leadership challenge. Even if he hangs on, he'll still be brought down by a familiar nuisance. Pretty much since the NDP's founding in 1961, the party's chief internal struggle has been the age-old question of whether it should tack to the center or the left, whether it should try to beat the Liberals at their own game or remain faithful to its organized labor and prairie populist origins." David, a lot can change quickly in a campaign, as we know, but if things remain where they are today, what path do you think the NDP should take?
Well, I'll do a disclosure here off the top. As the country's housebroken socialist in the mainstream, that's my tendency. They let me in the rooms because I'm a tall white guy with a PhD and I don't ruffle too many feathers. It's nice to be that kind of insidious radical, but I think the NDP should be radical. I think they should go all in on unabashed, unapologetic, nation-building, class politics. I think there's nothing more important than class politics. It's one of the markers that cuts across all these other cleavages, all these other markers. It's the one thing that can potentially unite millions of Canadians. And it takes work, though. You've got to build that class consciousness. You've got to build from the grassroots in communities and in church basements and at the union table, at campus clubs, online and offline. You've got to really, really build that. But expressly class politics above all. And also, I think the party should decentralize a little bit. The NDP talks a lot about grassroots, and grassroots is great, but we know that there's a strong presence of experts, of professionals at the table who drive the party, that often the constituencies are actually kind of diminished or muted compared to the central folks. Go more all in on the grassroots. Go in on class politics, unabashedly so. Roll up your sleeves. Do the Bernie Sanders playbook a little bit and reclaim that ground from Tories and Liberals who are cosplaying class politics for workers. Go be what Tommy Douglas was, and maybe even use the word socialist if you're feeling feisty. Jagmeet Singh won't use it, but I'd like to see an NDP leader use it again, like they did back in the 60s and 70s.
Shachi, Trump voters and right-wing populists say things like the game is rigged, the system is unfair and unequal, and the elites are winning at everyone else's expenses. Progressives have been saying this forever as well. Is there any reason why the progressive left can't tap into these same feelings and frustrations?
I mean, it's interesting because the question is who identifies as progressive left, who identifies as socialist, who sees themselves in the modern federal NDP. That's the question. Do voters see themselves and a leader who understands their interests? And of course, Kim is going to say yes, but I have to bring you back to the fact that at least at this stage in the campaign, on this day of the campaign, there's only about 7% support nationally for the party, which is down to the territory where it was, in the days of Alexa McDonough and Audrey McLaughlin in the era of an old pizza pie parliament when it was NDP Reform, Progressive, Conservative, Liberal, and Bloc. There's I think, more runway at this stage and at this era for the NDP for all of the reasons that David has laid out. And yet we never saw Jagmeet Singh really convert. And I think it's because not enough voters saw or identified themselves with the party under his leadership, saw or identified themselves with him. And until that changes, either through his own approach, through party policies, or through just a sense that, yes, the NDP is there for me, for my household, given my concerns, given all the other choices I have as a voter, that will continue to be a problem, especially in a really tight 5-week campaign, which when you take into account advanced polling is even shorter than 5 weeks, that has already narrowed really down to two choices. Where and how and when does Singh and the NDP sort of elbow their way through and create space? Maybe that happens later in the campaign. Maybe it happens on the campaign trail. Maybe it happens after a debate, but that debate is coming pretty late in the campaign. So that is the task, the devoir for Jagmeet Singh and the NDP with what little time he has to achieve it.
Time will tell. We're unfortunately going to have to leave it there. Shachi, David, Kim, thank you so much for your insights. Really, really good to see you all.
Thank you. We're excited to see how Jagmeet becomes the new Jack Layton.
We are where you are. TVO's current affairs journalism is available across platforms across Ontario, on Roku, Amazon Fire, Apple TV, and more. Catch The Agenda, The Thread, On Poly, and other podcasts, docs, and video series on the device of your choice when you choose.
Since 2001, Ron Deibert and his team at the University of Toronto's Citizen Lab have uncovered dozens of covert spy operations over the years. In his new book, Chasing Shadows, Cyber Espionage, Subversion, and the Global Fight for Democracy, he chronicles how and why Citizen Lab became a world-renowned digital watchdog. And in our conversation tonight, he may have a few things to say about a certain American president as well. Ron Deibert, great to have you back here at TVO.
Always a pleasure to be here, Steve.
As we indicated, 2001, you founded the Citizens Lab. It's fairly, early days for the internet. Has the mission of your lab evolved over that quarter century?
Actually, the mission hasn't evolved much. I would say if anything's changed, it's that we're doing now what we aspired to do then. And, when I set up the Citizen Lab, I had this vision of essentially borrowing the techniques of state intelligence practices and turning them around to watch governments and corporations. And back then it was all just hubris. We had no basis to make this claim to be doing counterintelligence for civil society. And if you fast forward to today, we're really doing it. We're doing it quite well, to the point where that old adage comes to mind, careful what you wish for.
Well, Washington Post, New York Times, lots of people are noticing that you are doing good work. Talk to us about the types of cyber risks that you are talking about, from sort of the less nefarious to the most urgent.
Well, I would say that, over the years that the internet has evolved, governments and corporations have become more adept at controlling information. They've become more ambitious about it. There's a whole private industry that helps them do various things. And we set out to map all of that. And, the low-hanging fruit is things like internet censorship. It's pretty harmless, relatively speaking, just blocking access to information. But then if you move across the spectrum, what I talk about in the book concerns what I would consider to be the most risky, the most serious, which is the technology that's provided to government intelligence agencies and law enforcement to get inside a target's device. Once you're inside a device with the latest, most sophisticated spyware, you can activate the microphone, you can turn on the camera, you can of course read all the emails and the messages, even those that are end-to-end encrypted, and you can track someone's location. You can even go back in time and find out where they've been, who they've been meeting with. So this is godlike capabilities, and the latest versions of this spyware enable government clients to get into a phone without any user interaction whatsoever. Even the companies that secure those phones, Apple, Google, Microsoft, are unable to keep ahead of the race with some of those mercenary spyware firms. So if you think about that, some of the world's worst autocrats, dictators, and others around the world right now have the capability, if they choose, to get inside your phone, my phone, anyone else in the world, and perform these functions, which are incredibly revealing.
That is not a comforting thought.
It's not, no. And that's why we do what we do. We try to track these down, investigate abuse cases when we see them, and bring them to the public's attention.
Your focus here is cyber espionage.
Yeah.
How come?
Well, that's the most serious. I mean, I thought when we started the Citizen Lab, we probably wouldn't be able to touch any of that because it's just too well organized, very secretive. But we found out that this mercenary spyware industry exists, and they make mistakes. They leave digital breadcrumbs all over the place that investigators like us can unearth. And what we found is really quite astonishing, like a tsunami of abuse cases around the world. Journalists, human rights defenders, NGOs, political opposition, all having their phones hacked using this type of spyware. The other reason I focused on it is, frankly, like the last 15 years or so have really been a whirlwind. We've been involved in disrupting active cyber espionage campaigns involving China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, domestic espionage campaigns in Spain. Our reports have precipitated the sacking of heads of intelligence agencies. So, people say to me, it's incredible what you guys have been involved in. You should stop and write it up. So I thought, well, before something happens, I better get this down on paper.
What do you mean before something happens? What does that mean?
Well, I'm getting old. You're getting old. I mean, we may okay. Move on.
I wondered whether that was a reference to the... Okay, shall we do it here?
I don't know. Should we?
Well, we're joking here, but I mentioned to you before we went on the air, there's a reference in your book to the fact that we live in a world right now where the shake of a hand can pass a toxin from one person to another, and you can be killed that way.
Yeah, and there are a lot of bad actors whose operations we have exposed, and they don't like what we're doing. And those are powerful people that have shown a propensity to do all sorts of horrible things. So there are major risks doing this type of work. There's no doubt about it. I deal personally, and my team deals with hundreds of victims around the world. These are frontline people who experience these type of risks all the time. So being in the same boat as them when we're doing the research kind of gives you a kinship. You feel like you're part of the same struggle, if you will, even though we're the investigators. And we have to take those risks seriously. It's part of the bargain of doing this type of work.
I'm going to say one word to you, and then you're going to tell us a story about why this was so extraordinary.
Okay.
The word is Pegasus.
Well, Pegasus is a spyware of the type that I just described, manufactured by the notorious Israel-based mercenary spyware firm NSO Group. And it was until 2016 when we published the first report on NSO Group's Pegasus spyware. It was a very secretive company. I mean, people heard rumors of it existing, but we produced the first report and have done dozens of reports since 2016 showing how their technology has been used by governments in inappropriate ways. So companies like that say that they sell this technology to help law enforcement and intelligence agencies investigate serious matters of crime and terrorism.
Do you believe that?
Well, no, I don't. It's not that I believe it or not. It's inaccurate.
Demonstrably false.
It's demonstrably false. I mean, that's the point of the research, is we've shown that, it sounds right, but if you ask a first-year political science student, what's wrong with that claim? They'll say, well, there are many governments around the world for whom journalism is a crime. Women's rights activism is a crime or terrorism. Just now in the United States, we have Donald Trump considering issuing an executive order saying fentanyl is a weapon of mass destruction. So you have all sorts of arbitrary definitions around these terms, and not surprisingly, governments are going to be using this technology to go after anyone they consider irritants to their rule.
What is the usefulness of contacting somebody by phone to tell them that they are under surveillance when that phone they are using has no doubt been hacked?
Yeah, that's a challenge. It's a bit of a paradox, and we've been in that situation before where we know somebody is under surveillance. We have to alert them. What you try to do is get them off that device, and you try to first and foremost secure that device because the device has evidence on it. So you want to make sure they don't panic and erase it all, because we want to be able to find the forensic logs that we can examine. But you try to move them to some other device, and it's not always easy.
Who were, back to the NSO group for a second here in Pegasus, who were some of that company's clients who were not exactly using this technology for savory purposes?
Well, the one that comes to mind is Saudi Arabia. So we had this incredible story that I tell in the book about identifying a victim of Pegasus spyware here in Canada, a person named Omar Abdulaziz. He was a Canadian permanent resident, had a YouTube channel at the time in 2018 that was mocking MBS, something again.
Mohammed bin Salman.
Yeah, Mohammed bin Salman, something in that context is considered a crime. And so they hacked his phone, and we published our report October 1st, 2018. The next day, he sent me a text message saying, "Jamal has gone missing. I'm very afraid." I had no idea who he was referring to until I turned on CNN and saw Jamal Khashoggi went into the consulate in Turkey and was horribly murdered. So we and others had discovered that basically everyone around Jamal Khashoggi, his wife, his fiance, his friends, his colleagues, all had their phones hacked with Pegasus. Essentially, a spyware net was cast around his entire inner circle.
There's a story of the Ontario Provincial Police having an angle in this as well. How about sharing that one?
Yes, well, we've discovered yet another mercenary spyware firm, Paragon, another one with Israeli connections, that actually was marketing itself as the anti-NSO. They said, we have all sorts of guardrails in place. And lo and behold, it turns out that Italy has been using their technology to spy on journalists, human rights defenders, and it looks like a priest in that country, which if you think about having a priest phone under surveillance, imagine the confessional and what type of information somebody might get there. But we did analysis, and we have all sorts of network infrastructure mapping techniques, and we could see that there, lo and behold, there's a customer of this company in Ontario, and it's the Ontario Provincial Police. Turns out we have a spyware problem in this province and probably in this country. Police, probably intelligence agencies have been using this type of technology without disclosing it to the public, without privacy commissioners being aware. And so, there are many democracies around the world that abuse this country, and I think in Canada, we better put some strong regulations in place so we don't become the next democracy with a spyware abuse problem.
That may be unethical, but is it illegal?
No, it's not illegal. I guess it depends on how you look at privacy regulations and whatever guardrails there are in this province. But that's precisely the problem, is a lot of these agencies operate in gray areas or frankly under cover of secrecy. And there are instances like this where I think it's in the public interest to know what type of technology they're procuring. That's taxpayer money going to a firm that is involved in abuse of human rights abroad. At the very least, we shouldn't be procuring it from a firm like that.
The Ontario Provincial Police does have civilian oversight in the Ministry of the the Solicitor General.
Right.
Do you think the elected Solicitor General of Ontario knows about this?
Probably not, actually. That'd be a good question to ask them. And that's because it appears to us that police in this province and across Canada aren't exactly transparent. So they have been using different acronyms when they are using this type of technology. They have their own Canadian acronym, on-device interception tools. So they're not exactly forthcoming about how often they use this, what they're using it for, whether they get warrants for it, and so forth.
Gotcha. What's the craziest threat you've ever uncovered at the lab?
Well, I mean, there have been so many incidents. There's some that strike me personally. One is a woman named Loujain Al-Hatul, who as we speak is in country arrest in Saudi Arabia. She's well known internationally for being an advocate for the woman's right to drive a car without a chaperone in Saudi Arabia. We discovered her phone was hacked with NSO Group's Pegasus spyware. We captured the exploit that was used to hack her phone. That technology is worth on the market well over $20 million. We did a responsible disclosure to Apple because it was taking advantage of software flaws that Apple wasn't aware of, and they issued an emergency security patch for every Apple user around the world, billions of customers, simply because of that one woman's bravery. So there are many cases like that, and honestly, there are too many to single out one and say that's the craziest one, but that's the most memorable for me because of her work.
Let's look south. We're going to do an excerpt here because you got a piece in the Globe and Mail recently, the title of which, "The United States is putting the United States in danger." And here's what you wrote. Sheldon, you want to bring this up? And I'll read along for those listening on podcast. "It's apparent to almost everyone in the world over that the United States is rapidly descending into authoritarianism. We are observing routine attacks on democratic institutions, the undermining of the rule of law, daily assaults on the press, politicization of government agencies, including intelligence and law enforcement agencies, the encouragement of political violence, the deliberate evisceration of formal checks and balances, and outright corruption and self-enrichment. As these practices become normalized in the United States, they will have major consequences for security worldwide, including, ironically, in the United States." Okay.
Nothing wrong there.
Well, it sounds like there is. That was just a few days ago you had that piece up. Now, you had a recent assignment in Washington, D.C., which takes us to the States. Why don't you tell us about that?
Well, actually, those comments in the Globe and Mail came about because I was asked to brief members and staff of the U.S. Senate Select Committee on Intelligence about this topic that we've been discussing, about mercenary spyware, something I've done numerous times. And normally that's a great honor to do something like that. It's an important stakeholder body. If you can explain to them the importance of this and they can take action, that's important for us in this area. But I actually did a big pause. I thought long and hard about whether even to accept this invitation. I'm an officer of the Order of Canada. My father was a World War II veteran who served overseas to fight fascism. And here, as this invitation comes in, the President of the United States is threatening repeatedly to annex my country. So I decided I would write up these remarks and just deliver them in the same way that they're actually printed in the Globe and Mail. That's a verbatim transcript of what I said. And my comments to them were, look, everyone in the world can see what's going on. You're really destroying yourself. You're destroying your country. And a committee like that has an important role to play. As we talked about oversight here in Ontario. That's one of their jobs down there, and they need to step up and prevent and check the descent into this kind of cruel techno-fascism that we're seeing.
Did you hear back?
Actually, one of the staff members of a senator said you should publish those remarks, and that's why I sent them to the Globe and Mail.
Back to your quote from the piece. As Trump's chaotic style of governing continues, what impact do you think this is going to have on cybersecurity around the world?
It's a disaster. I mean, in the book I described, there's a bright light in the book at the end where we had great success advocating for the United States to take measures to regulate this industry. And President Biden signed an executive order prohibiting 18 U.S. federal agencies from procuring spyware from companies like NSO Group. I briefed the White House staff. I played a role in bringing about those regulations. It's kind of like for a political scientist winning the Holy Grail to have President Biden sign an executive order. Now all of that's up in the air, of course. And given the extent to which they're basically steamrolling over the rule of law, over checks and balances, that will be noticed around the world. It will legitimize the same actions abroad. Despots and authoritarian regimes will say if the United States is doing it, we'll do it too. And I have great fears that those regulations will now be rolled back, which will precipitate even greater proliferation of this very powerful technology with all of the harmful consequences that we've documented.
What do we do, Ron, about a case, though, where 50% of the United States, 50% of its citizens think if Donald Trump thinks it needs to be done, then we're okay with that?
That's a tough nut to crack. It's how we ended up in this place, how they ended up in this place is very complex political, sociological phenomenon. I honestly don't have an easy answer for that, other than I think it's important for people in that country to realize just how far they've gone off the deep end. And that's why, in part, I wrote those comments, because we're obviously concerned about our security here in Canada. Many other countries around the world are as well. But U.S. citizens should be concerned about their own security, because they're really shooting themselves in the foot right now.
We in Canada are negotiating quietly a bilateral data sharing agreement with the United States called the Cloud Act. What's that about?
Well, the Cloud Act is one of these type of information sharing arrangements that in normal circumstances probably wouldn't draw much attention. It's to facilitate information sharing between law enforcement on both sides of the border. Even before the election of Donald Trump, we at the Citizen Lab had concerns about that, privacy risks and so on related to this piece of legislation. Now, of course, I think it's just bananas. At the heart of this act, it would allow U.S. law enforcement to reach into Canadian data centers and access data without a warrant, without going through a judicial process here in Canada. I mean, this is just madness now, given the risks that exist between us and the United States.
You also say that former Prime Minister Stephen Harper's top spies and Privy Council officials intimidated you over your lab's reports on NBS. Tried to intimidate you. Okay. But that provokes a good story here, so tell us that.
This was way back in 2010, and you may recall at that time the Citizen Lab produced the very first reports on cyber espionage in China. It was a blockbuster report that we had published, first of its kind. We outed a cyber espionage campaign that China was undertaking, and it was front page of the New York Times. We had heard rumors that people within the Canadian government weren't too happy about this. So in order to smooth things over, our mutual friend Janice Stein set up a meeting at the Privy Council office, and they accused us of all sorts of inappropriate things, hacking computers and so on, which were just not true. So it was a very curious experience to have that meeting, and what I thought would be something that the Canadian authorities would applaud turned out to be something they were very uncomfortable with. And I guess it boils down to the very phenomenon of what the Citizen Lab represents. We don't pick sides. We're completely independent. We will forecast and look wherever the evidence leads us, and that means we are disrupting China, Russia, cyber espionage one moment, could be Canadian the next. So I think that's what made them very uncomfortable.
You had the temerity to hope that they might actually be encouraging your work and be glad to know what you had come up with?
I guess so, yeah. Maybe I was naive.
It didn't work out that way. Give us your thoughts on the increasing what appears to be public-private cooperation into where cybercrime and espionage have really reached unparalleled heights now.
Well, I think that the technology we're describing, which is, I would say, the ultimate type of surveillance technology, when you can get inside someone's phone, you have a God's eye view into everything that goes on in that phone. And that's very expensive technology. And most of those companies, even though they're quite careless about to whom they sell their technology, at least they say they restrict it to government clients. What we are seeing are all sorts of private companies now offering not quite the same level of sophisticated technology, but different ways of accomplishing maybe the same things, hacking your email inbox and so forth, to a whole range of private sector clients, oligarchs, corporations that are involved in litigation. And again, this gets back to the norms that are being set and normalized by the United States. We're entering into a real lawless kind of frontier right now, and it's a very dangerous time. We're dependent on these technologies. They're highly revealing. And to the extent that bad actors can get inside our devices, I think that could put a lot of people in danger.
How well or badly is Canada doing on all of this?
We talk a lot about what we should be doing to regulate this space. Canada signed on to a statement of principles to commit to regulating spyware, but like in other areas of our commitments, it's mostly words right now. I wish we were doing a lot more to protect vulnerable people from this type of risk, but so far I don't really see us doing much other than rhetoric.
In which case, what does good cyber hygiene look like to you?
I think it boils down to what you pointed out earlier about what should happen here in Ontario, proper oversight. There's lots of technical things I could say about, use this app or whatnot, two-factor authentication. But moving back a bit, I think the real problem here is that you have very powerful groups and entities with access to extremely sophisticated surveillance technology. The only way we can prevent that from being abused is if we have groups watching them. Citizen Lab watches from below. Well, we need entities watching from above as well. Those exist on paper, but they need to be super amplified in order to meet the task.
What about artificial intelligence? How's that a factor in this?
I mean, it just makes everything faster. It allows, for example, the groups that we've been talking about, these companies, to very quickly analyze software and look for vulnerabilities that they can exploit. It gives the offense a greater advantage. In theory, it should help defense, but that's not typically how things work in this ecosystem.
Ron, just finally,
Yeah.
I'm one of many billions of people in the world
who check your phone,
who carries this around, right?
Yeah.
And I guess the final question is, how worried should I be about hanging on to this thing?
Well, you're a journalist. I think you investigate important issues of public interest. You probably communicate a lot of sensitive things over the phone, and even if you don't, somebody might want to get access to your phone to find things that they can use to embarrass you. So you should be very, very concerned about it, given your public profile and your role as a journalist. And I've checked hundreds of journalists' phones for spyware. Given that you're in Canada, you probably have some degree of protection, but I think that's something that is not likely to last. So if I were you, I would get that checked by a group like ours.
Let's talk.
If we had
after
more
we're done.
time, I could do it right here.
Let's talk after we're done. No, I presume, obviously most of what goes on this thing is communicating with producers about what we're doing, and I don't know of how much interest that is to people who are outside this building, but I guess you never know.
You'd be surprised. You'd be surprised. I mean, anything that gives people information that then can be used to get at what they want in terms of their ultimate target might be exposed.
Fascinating. Let's remind people the book is called Chasing Shadows, Cyber Espionage, Subversion, and the Global Fight for Democracy, and we are delighted that it has brought Ronald J. Diebert, Ron Diebert, to our studio today. Thanks so much, Ron.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate it.
That is the agenda for Tuesday, March 25th, 2025. Tomorrow on the program, how are weight loss drugs like Ozempic changing the conversation around obesity? I'm Jay Jaganathan. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org, and we'll see you again tomorrow.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism. Always looking for more about what's going on at Queen's Park? Nerd out with Steve Paikin and John Michael McGrath and the On Poly podcast. Fridays on the Agenda, anytime on tvo.org or the podcast platform of your choice.